I want to thank you all so much for coming out tonight. My name is Gregory Ayers. I'm here with Loudmouth Press, the publisher of Mary Clare's new book, 100 Voices. Loudmouth Press is a small, nonprofit, independent publishing house. We're based out of Brooklyn, New York, and we've been operating for only about a year and a half. And Mary's book is just our third book. We're really very, very proud to be able to publish such a fantastic, ambitious piece of work. This project is really exciting, and it's everything that we're all about. Loudmouth Press excuse me, has a mission of working with artists, writers, critical thinkers, and activists whose work touches social justice issues and cultural critique and critical thinking, and so Mary just fits in perfect with our whole mission statement. So I'd like to introduce to you our new author that we're super proud of, Mary M. Clare.
I've been doing all of this over the internet.
Yeah, we just met tonight.
Today. Yeah, just a few minutes, like an hour ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's good. We like each other, which is handy. He did say to me over the phone, "You know, I haven't met you. You could have made all of this up," but I didn't. So not to worry. Thank you all for coming out this evening to hear about this book. There are some people in the audience who are voices. One of them is my mom, who came all the way from Atlanta. She and her book club were 4 of the voices. Calliope Crane is also here. Voice number 99. Yes. Yeah, and so this is great. Let's see, I don't want to forget. Good. All right, and the other thing I wanted to do is just to pause just for long enough to dedicate this gathering and this reading to the 3 voices who are no longer living. You know, you do something like this, and as a social scientist, I even wrote a note about this because one of the people who died was my fairy godmother, my mentor. She came out of the fog of Alzheimer's when I was in Sherman, Texas, to talk with me about change. And it meant the world to me. And she died while we were still doing the writing and revision on this. In the meantime, she was voice 44, Mamie Porter. In the meantime, I've learned that Bob Potter, voice 22, who is a veteran of the Vietnam War, who together with Steve Sherrill started Arlington West, which I saw when I was leaving Santa Barbara. 3,000 crosses out on the Santa Barbara, you know, this is expensive prime property, right? Prime hangout, make money off of the tourist property. And the veterans were allowed to do this, and they had been at it since the beginning of the war. And so I got to speak with them, and I learned from Steve Sherrill that Bob Potter has also passed away. And then voice number 17, Carol Ackerman, also died this past May. She was in her late 80s, and she and her husband spoke to me also in Santa Barbara. Marshall Ackerman began the magazine Prevention, which was one of the very first health magazines. Yes, so I got to speak with him. So I did want to dedicate this to those voices in particular. So I have, I know, before we do this, just to get us kind of warmed up, one of the things that this was an amazing kind of idea to come to me in the first place. It kind of came out of nowhere. But I followed it, and I came up, I'm a social scientist, and one of the things, social psychologist, that I know is that a good way to get information is to ask really big questions and not have an idea exactly where it's going to go. So by the time we got to the end of the election season last time round, no matter who people voted for, everybody was talking about change. And everyone was excited about change, regardless of how they felt about the outcome of the election. And so I knew that if you don't define what you mean, you can be pretty disappointed. So I was curious to see what everyday Americans were saying change meant to them. So the first question I had was, when you say the word change, what do you mean? And one of the first questions I got back was, well, do you mean politically or personally? And my answer was, uh-huh. Because that was the truth. I was interested in whatever it was that change meant to the people I was talking with at that time. In that moment, I said, today, to you, what does it mean? After all of this excitement about change. And so there are a few seats up here. Come on over, John. And so I would like for you to think for a second. Got it? Here we go. If you were to say today what change means to you, what would you say? Now think about it for just a few seconds. And turn to someone next to you that you don't really know, or behind you that you don't really know, and say, exchange, talk about, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and make sure each person gets a chance to talk. Say to the other person, what does change mean to you today?
What does change mean to you?
He's the only one he doesn't
Well, mostly at the moment it's just personal changes. I'm meeting since I had sort of a forced retirement. And that wasn't what I intended 10 years ago. In fact, every once in a while I kind of like peek my head about what it's meaning to me right now. It's something more of a social context. He's my Time magazine. He sort of sorts it all out and brings it down to like 2 paragraphs or something. And mostly what I see is that I need to keep focusing on what I need to get done. I'll get too distracted and discouraged. It will be very discouraging to have that context for my own.
About change, and I bring one right now. It's very.
Yes, that's right. I know. It was
Just the discouragement of the stuff that Bill does tell me about it, layered on top of the disappointment of my own personal disappointment.
It's a lot out there.
Okay, good. Now, as you can see, this is a topic that people have some stuff to say about, right? Now, I would love to hear from a couple of people, not many, because we're going to get on with the reading part and all that, but not what you said, but what you heard.
Getting rid of greed.
Thank you. What else?
Yeah.
Doing away with so much meanness between.
Thank you.
Well, Bill mentioned Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy Portland.
Yeah. This is all change. Yes.
Openness to possibilities.
Yes. Good, thank you. This is the feeling. This is the feeling of talking about what we mean when we say the word change. What we mean. So I'm gonna read to you. It's probably 20 minutes or so of reading. Oh, I also wanted to introduce my daughter. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. Hi.
Sarah is in Oxford, UK, and has been, along with my mother, these people are so much a part of who I am, and so this process as well, and have been great supporters all along the way. Sarah is already one just astonishing editor, but I just think she's brilliant anyway. She always has been. In utero, she was brilliant. I'll stop now. So, yeah, this is good. So I want to just read you a few things. Oh, and Stark, where'd you go? This is Carol and Marshall Ackerman's son. I was just mentioning Carol. So thank you so much for being here and for introducing yourself to me. Change is a word that Americans fell in love with in the months leading up to the 2008 U.S. presidential election. By the time we got to the polls, regardless of which candidate we were supporting, all of us wanted what the word change promised. Then, on November 4th, the word became a sentence. Change has come to America. Change had come. Some of us were elated, others were lukewarm, disappointed, or even furious. But no one could deny the change. Barack Obama had defeated John McCain, the Republican candidate, to become the first American man of African heritage to serve as our nation's president. As I watched and lived through these times, I found my social psychologist self noticing the enormous importance we had given to the idea of change. Words like change, hope, and values are big words. They carry a powerful emotional punch, but they can also be amorphous and imprecise, the meaning varying by the person using them. People say words like that to one another and assume that they both mean the same thing, and that's not always the case. We can associate great feelings with a word like change, and we can even think we are all working toward the same thing. But if we never stop to state clearly what we mean, then what we'll recognize as signs of change, meanings can become confused, and people can feel betrayed if ideals don't materialize as they expected. This book began as an idea that formed from such musings in the days surrounding the election. What if I went straight to the source? What if I drove around the country asking Americans about change? To start, I came up with 3 questions. The first question, when you say the word change, what do you mean? The second question, and this threw people. You know, they would talk for a while about change the way you all did, and then I would say, well, with all this change, what is important to have remain the same? And the last question was, what would the signs that positive change, what would be the signs for you that positive change is occurring? And so I go on to talk about how it's very important for us, if a lot of us would like say we want to be happy, for example, right? But if nobody stops us and says, well, what do you mean? What does that mean to you? And what would it look like if happiness were coming toward you? Then we can feel betrayed by life forever, right? It's very good fortune if somebody asks us that. So that's what I was curious about. I was curious to see what people would say. That bit is from the introduction. I used road notes throughout the book to kind of give a feeling of the trip itself, because one of the ways that, well, the way that I did organize the book was by geography, which makes sense. And I started the day after the inauguration. I wanted to get 100 voices in 100 days, and I did. Along the way, as I'm sharing the particular voices, I also write about my own experience. So I elected not to disappear from the narrative, but to stay a part of it with my own experience. So here's one that I wrote. I am between Jackson, Mississippi, and Montgomery, Alabama. So it would have been late January? No, late February. Late February of 2009. I had just interviewed a bunch of people in Jackson, but the last 2 folks that I talked with were 2 of my boy cousins. So I did interview some relatives. I interviewed some people I knew, and probably a little over 50% of the people were people that I didn't know. Yes?
Maybe I missed this because I came late, but how did you attract people to interviews? How did you?
I went to coffee shops.
Okay, just went to coffee
Yeah,
shop. Okay.
and I had my little, this is too cute. Flip camera. This is what, I mean, Stark has seen the result of this. I'm not so great at it. It got his father from here, up or here down? I forget. They're down. I was so taken by what he was saying, but I didn't look at the little monitor to make sure that I was getting it. But this is where I got all my audio. And so then I got rough video, that kind of hip video, right? A little too hip in some cases. Let me get back to that. Remember that one, Anna, because I would like to get back to that one. All right, I hugged my cousins and got in the Mini Cooper and pulled out of Jackson, Mississippi. I was headed for Montgomery, Alabama. Over the few hours I had spent in Mississippi, I had spoken only with people in the capital. But still, in that time and space, I had heard a pretty remarkable array of opinions. By now I had driven 3,500 miles of the highways we all share. Through the windshield, I had witnessed remarkable changes in our nation's landscape. A week ago, I was driving on roads in the desert of New Mexico. Today, I rolled through the modest rise and fall of land, resting in the Alabama River Valley and leaving the Cumberland Plateau. I was also mapping the same road where, as a child, I remember people driving horse-drawn wagons eastward to be part of the Poor People's March on Washington. She was driving. I remember that. I was deep at that time, as I'm writing, I was deep in the land of the civil rights movement. I stopped for gas in Selma. I noticed that all the neighborhoods I drove through were full of people, which is not all that remarkable, except that it was the middle of the week. Many Americans say that the goals of the civil rights movement, a presence I felt strongly on the historic road between Selma and Montgomery, have yet to be realized. Many of the people I saw in Selma lived the truth of that assessment with far too little work and far too many families living below the poverty line. So that's an example of these road notes that thread between the voices from time to time. Then I wanted to read you a little bit of a couple of voices. It was very important to me to get as wide an array as I could. And so I want to read from the interview with a woman that I call Anna. Isn't that cool? Yeah, you came to mind actually when I came up with this name. This is voice number 63, and this was in Marietta, Georgia. I was very interested to hear, this is me prior to her voice, I was very interested to hear from someone who specifically supported Sarah Palin's vice presidential candidacy. My cousin helped me connect with a businesswoman in her 60s from Cobb County. Out of respect for her wish to be kept anonymous, I call her Anna. Anna and I met at a family restaurant in Marietta, Georgia. The air was warm enough for us to sit outside. Anna was slow to let her guard down. She gracefully alluded to her caution about my motives. It made sense to me. In a similar situation, I'd be cautious too. This is what Anna had to say. Change has become such a buzzword lately. I think most people mean better when they say change. The word reflects human optimism. We want change for the better, and therefore we keep striving. To me, true change would be less strife, less meanness, more understanding of people's differences, communities' differences, countries' differences. That would be signified with less conflict of all kinds. We have a fairly homogeneous and very conservative immediate community here. The main conflict is in reaction to what is seen as liberalism in Washington. Ours is a very private enterprise, capitalism community. That right there is Cobb County, state of Georgia, thinking. What gets misunderstood in the whole public debate are people's motives. People who want socialistic type change suspect the motives of other people to be greed and all for themselves. People who want free enterprise and individual freedom think the other side wants to take from them and give to people who don't work for it. The pendulum swings. We're here on it. I sure hope it goes back to the center somewhere. For a number of years, I worked, I'll stop there. And she talks about her work in the Chamber of Commerce. She talks about Palin, which you're going to have to read. And she talks about her perspectives on free enterprise. And then she goes back to this theme. She says, the pendulum swings, we're her on it. I sure hope it goes back to the center somewhere. Toward the end, she says, balance is so important. Maybe we were too far right before. And she laughs. But we need always to be sure there aren't too many restrictions. I want progress, not undercutting of business or personal freedom. That way my granddaughter can have a good climate to grow up in. And I don't want any more wars and strife and killing and dying. We've also had huge issues with guarding and protecting our natural resources. The state of Georgia is fighting 2 other states on water that flows north from here. Protecting natural resources and using them wisely is another thing I want for my granddaughter. Having those issues in the forefront has been a good thing. People have become more aware. You don't have to run the water the whole time you're brushing your teeth. It's a little thing, but water scarcity makes you think. That's the way it is with change at every level. There is the day-to-day stuff we have to figure out, but we also need to remember to step back and take a broader look, to get a little bit outside ourselves and consider the community and the coming generations. That's why, if I could, I would go to school forever, and I would never stop work. And she laughs again. My change would be just to keep learning. Okay? All right. Here is a last voice that I'd like to read. I thought this is her picture. Her name is Daniela, and she spoke to me when I was on Long Island for the first time in my life. Yeah. She is an 8th grader.
Oh.
So she's a 10th grader now, I'm guessing. And she says, to me, change is to get up in the morning and decide I'm going to do something better to better other people, to better my community, and then to do it. There are those days where you don't want to get out of bed at all, but you say, I have to get up because I can change something. Change benefits everyone. Change for the better. I want to see communities change. We're so isolated into different groups. You go into a school and you see certain types. In the cafeteria, there's a group of girls with the same likes and interests who sit together. Then there's a separate group of boys that sit someplace else. You look around and go, why can't all of this change? But they're stuck in their ways. They don't want to change. They feel change is bad. But you don't call bad change change. I think of change as a positive thing because you're moving towards something for the greater good. I want to see change in the grouping at my school because now the minute people step outside the classroom, they want nothing to do with each other. Then they get the wrong ideas about other people. One group will look at the other group and go, they're freaks, they're outsiders, we can't talk to them because they're different from us. But once you talk to each other, you realize these people aren't that different from me. We have people who are very sports-oriented. We have people with scholarly aspirations. She was a little precocious. Then we have people who are very much into their art. That's a large group in our school. People don't mingle with each other much because they feel they have totally different likes or wants or needs. But they're human. They need food, shelter, water, and most of them have lots of the same ideas as the person who's sitting across the room from them. The negative stories that come out of that splitting or hurting people. All you need is a catalyst. One person can be a catalyst and change everything. On occasion, I will see someone walk over to another table and sit down and act as if there wasn't a difference at all. That's what we need to work towards, to walk across the room or across the street. You can walk across the street anywhere. You can drive across the country like you're doing. You can go anywhere and find connections with people. So she goes on after that. I know, isn't that lovely? Can you see how, I mean, every next voice I would get in the car and go, okay, I'm in love. You know, it was over and over and over. It was so fabulous. Yes?
Of all the people that you interviewed, how many voices are in the book? Did you interview lots of people that didn't make it into the book? Or did you?
Well, you know, it depends on how you count. There were 20 students in High Tech High LA, which was a barrio high school in LA. Mostly kids who were going to be the first generation in their family to go to college. And I only have 2 voices, although I talked with all of them. That was great fun. And then I talked with 9 preschoolers, and they count as 2, their teacher and 1 voice, you know, so that kind of. And there were a couple of other interactions that were so brief or so, but for the most part, it wasn't like I had 130 and cut it down to 100, except for you take into account the high school and the preschool. Yeah.
Was everyone so articulate?
Well, you know, it was kind of amazing. People, when you read the preschoolers, they're preschoolers, you know. and it is true to the way people spoke. And I would say yes, people, what I found, and I'm going to read a little bit from that section, is that people really just, it's an exceptional experience to be listened to. And so here's this woman they don't even know, right, in some cases, who, I had these little buttons that these wonderful volunteers of mine had helped me come up with the brand, and then talked me into blogging. I didn't even know what that meant, you know, back in just 2 years ago. It was kind of new, wasn't it? Sort of, kind of. But I didn't know what it was. And so they branded me, which was an experience all by itself. And then we made these little buttons, because I didn't want to have cards or anything. This was about the interaction. It wasn't about me. So it had the URL, and there were little ones, and there were slightly bigger ones. And so when I was sitting, and I used Starbucks a lot, because I had to manage this whole thing, right? I went half-time and got in my car and drove. And I needed to manage. People had volunteered, you can read about that too, their homes. Friends, friends of friends, friends of friends of friends, people I did not know, had volunteered their homes around the country. I made this decision to do this on the 31st of December, 2008. And by the 15th of January, there wasn't one place in the whole country that I didn't have a place to stay. Wow. Isn't that incredible? Yeah. So, I mean, it had this kind of wildfire to it. Okay, I'm getting off. I'm getting off. So I'll read just a little bit more, and then we'll open up for more questions. Yeah. Is that
Great.
Is that okay? Okay. So this is the bit that I wrote when I was back, or about being back in Portland. I was back in Portland at last. 86 voices, 70 days, and 10,000 miles later. I had traveled changes in landscape and all kinds of weather, and I was still vibrating from barreling down I-80 through Iowa and across I-70 out of Denver amidst the constant giganto truck traffic, me and the Mini Cooper and the trucks. The Mini, there's a whole story about what happened to the Mini Cooper, but the Mini made it back the whole way and was now in the shop for 4 weeks. No matter, I was back safe and sound and ready to look for the final 14 interviews. So there exists a common misconception to think that you know someone when you really don't. The people in this room who are in my class right now, you sweethearts, have heard this I think before already, but what I do know is the story that I have in my mind about a person, whether or not it's entirely accurate. The truth is that we all have stories of each other. When we first meet, we apply conscious and unconscious ways of assessing the new person so that we can begin our story of them. This is a very natural social impulse and most often contributes to building relationships. It's harmless. For instance, I may be in a checkout line at a supermarket and glance toward the cashier. Without any bad intentions or judgments, I find myself developing a story about that person. Maybe it's only based on an observation like, that guy has enormous earrings. Other things, including visual and cultural references or vague impressions, contribute to the story that I wrap around him. These impressions may or may not be right, but they occur without any particular motive or bias. Over time, if I enter into more substantial interaction with the cashier and our regular contact develops into a friendship, my inner story grows. I gain new information with each interaction, but sometimes I may find that I'm not willing to change the story. The story I've started in my mind. In those interactions, I can end up disrespecting him by refusing to change my original version of who I think he is. This can happen with anyone. It can happen with my work colleagues. It can happen with my next door neighbor, with the president, with my daughter. Sorry, honey. When I insist on keeping my story, what began as an innocent observation can develop into judgment. New information can be difficult to accept because there are things that we don't want to be true about the person across from us. Whether it is a close friend or relatives who share news with us that concerns us, or with strangers who behave in ways that challenge our stereotypes, we can run into difficulty when we refuse to modify our stories. For example, Anna, I was calling her Anna earlier, Anna, yeah, who I just read to you. Anna and I both came to her interview knowing that my cousin, a conservative Republican, had talked to each of us about both the project and our political leanings. She had agreed to the interview and was willing to talk candidly about her affinity for Sarah Palin, regardless of the fact that we tend to vote differently. That takes courage and openness. Anna's interest in promoting dialogue, her devotion to the dignity of women, and her concern for the environment surprised me as significant components of her value system. These things didn't match with the story I had in my mind about her. Again and again, the unique range of ideas and perspectives in many of the exchanges and complete strangers all continue to teach me about the art of listening. People are so hungry to talk with someone who is actually paying attention. Time and again, being listened to set them at ease, and they quickly shifted to speaking with candor and untroubled openness. Maybe this is universal. We want to tell our truth, not necessarily to defend it, just to tell it. So I'll stop there and we can talk more about it.
So we have time if anybody has any questions about the project or anything they want to ask Mary. We can have a little question and answer session now.
Yes.
What would you like people to take away from this book?
I am so thrilled that Loudmouth picked this up.
And we're so proud to publish you.
Yeah. It's just, I think it took courage. Oh, Rakshith, I'm seeing Rakshith. I'm sorry, I hope I don't embarrass you. Here's another voice, too. This is my web guru guy. This is Rakshith. He makes my web reels.
He's hiding.
Oh, he's hiding, but here he is. Raise your hand, okay? Thank you. Yay, it's good to see you. Yay, another voice. Yay, is here. So, I am thrilled that Loudmouth picked this up because the thing that I found and that was most astonishing to me, I've expected that we had more in common than we've been told by the media. That the red-blue thing is just not as stark as we have been led to understand by the media and by the politicians, and that it serves somebody else because it's not serving us. And that if we stop and really listen to each other, and I will say I got some good lessons in that, because that's the thing. I would like people to take away a motivation to kind of skill, because we have to stop the chatter in our head long enough to see if there's a place where that we have in common. And what I found in this book in this project is that we have so much in common. The places we differ are significant, and in large part they're in how to accomplish the values that we share. What I'm not convinced of at this point is that for most citizens of this country, that those ways of addressing things are ideas that we have come up with, or things that we just have heard and think are the way to go, rather than things that we have thought about and really would choose to do. You see, I hope that makes some sense. So that's a long answer to your question, but the takeaway is really to give this democracy thing a chance. I think it's up to us. You know? Yes.
Was there any?
Oh, me?
Let me check with
I'm just curious, as you were going through this whole process, and I don't know how many people that were different like this Anna woman, you had to have some connection to be able to ease into it. But I'm wondering, as you went through this process, if you went through some kind of your own transformation of how you approach people who you might think are very, very different, and if there were certain areas in the country where it was harder for you to make that that first step to asking these questions.
When I was raised in the South, so that makes a difference, and that shows up in this book, because it gives me a perspective that it felt a bit privileged, because I was raised loving and caring for people who see the world very differently than I do, relatives, and I interviewed some of them. When I was in Texas, there were a couple of people who my friends suggested I might be, you know, he introduced me. And they managed not to be there when I came back later.
Oh.
You know, so that did happen. But let me tell you also about several coffee shop interactions. There was one in Texas where, and a lot of these, you know, people, getting back to your question, Anna, people who I didn't know, it was often in coffee shop connections. When I was doing the, can I find Wi-Fi someplace so I can write the people I just spent time with and set up the place where I'm going and write my blog. So I'm sitting there and I would start up these conversations with people. In Texas, there were two men that I overheard planning a youth group for the Baptist church in a small rural town. And I had overheard them, and before I left, I was packing up my stuff. I just walked over and said, "This is what I'm doing. Would you be willing to talk with me?" And they were delighted to talk with me. And the older of the two, at one point, it's Tommy and David, at one point said, "You know, I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat. We're real good at demonizing each other. You know, but if we listen to each other, and we're all going the same place anyway, we came from the same place anyway, as far as I can tell." You know, so that was, and at the end, I got some really cool stuff after the flip camera was off. At the end, this man, Tommy Carpenter, said, "You know, we've been majoring in the minors instead of the majors. We need to get over ourselves and just concentrate on what's important to everybody right now. We can get back to that other stuff, but we need to get together on some things." It was just beautiful. And this happened to be the town where I went to high school, Tybee High School. Tybee Fight Never Dies. And so I thought that maybe I was in school with this guy, but no, he was younger than me. Like, you know, a grown-up. He was a grown-up. He is a grown-up. So am I. And then there were other examples. There was a man in Jackson, Mississippi, who that was the day after Obama had first addressed the joint session of Congress. And it wasn't the State of the Union address because he hadn't been president long enough. And so I leaned over to this gentleman next to me who was reading the paper and asked if he'd heard the address, because I had not. And I don't remember if he said he had or he hadn't, but he was off to the races. He was talking about, he was upset. And I said, "Can I tell you, you know, I want to tell you what I'm doing, and I wonder if I could interview you." His name is Kim Wade, and it turns out that he's a African-American conservative talk show host who had a lot of really critical things to say about the Obama administration and about a lot of progressive causes. But as I listened to him, what he was saying about education for black youth was just right on. And so, I mean, that's what, if you listen long enough, I start hearing ways that we're seeing the world in the same way. I don't know if he and I, what kind of long-term conversation we could have. I don't know. But he was willing to speak with me. So I would say that I had less luck finding the voices that were from the more, you know, I don't know for sure because I didn't ask people going in. People, and some people would lead and never leave talking about personal change. They weren't even interested in talking about political change. So, yeah.
So, in the example that you just gave of Kim Wade and how you said as he went on, you really had this sense of there was this commonality that you recognized. Did you have a sense that he could feel that as well?
You know, that to be, I'm not sure. One of the things that he said to me, that it was February like 29th, that I had no context for when he said it, but when I was transcribing the interviews, he said, tomorrow or Tuesday or something like that, we're having a meeting of like-minded people who in a nonviolent and systematic way are going to influence the elections in 2010. And I think he was telling me of a first meeting of the Tea Party.
Wow.
I don't know that. We didn't know about the Tea Party then. It hadn't formed. So, you know, and I don't know, he wasn't interested in that. That wasn't his interest. His interest was in being heard, and he had some important things to say. So, yeah. And your question earlier?
Well, I just wondered if there were any common threads or themes or anything that connected people across the country.
Everybody's done with war. Almost, yeah, I would say without exception. There was one man that I interviewed, back to Chris's question, my car, you'll have to read the story. But in Georgia, it had to spend some time in a body shop. And I interviewed 2 men there, both of whom were talking about how they were considering living in other countries. And so one of those has a military background, and it's interesting to hear him talk about the military, though, because it was a last resort sort of thing. So I would say that was a thread. The environment was a pretty consistent thread. The economy, of course, was already top on people's minds. But one of the things that did come up over and over again was a profound desire for maturity in our leadership. You know, and I got that from all sides, whether it was more conservative or more progressive thinkers, people who would align themselves in that way, yes.
Did people talk about their role in creating change, or
yes.
were they waiting for change?
Yes, that was
evolve?
another theme that was pretty consistent. Early on, a man here in Portland, Nick Menace, spoke of how, you know, he's a laborer, working class man, said, I'm ready, but I need somebody to help me know where to place my priority. And I don't think that this can happen alone. That was said over and over and over again. People were at that point saying, this can't happen. One person can't do this. The very first voice.
One person meaning
Barack Obama, right? Or any single person can't do that by themselves. Yeah. And so we all need to be in on it. I want to have to ask a few of the voices, if you'd like, to say what you would say about change today. I mean, I'm putting you on the spot, and I didn't ask you, so you don't have to say, but
sure.
This is Avishan. What's your number, do you know?
89.
No. Is it 89? Yes, it is.
Yep.
This is Avishan.
Anything
about change for now, today.
Sure.
Yes.
So I attend, I've had a lot of change. I'm 23 years old, and I attend the School of Classical Chinese Medicine. And so I guess if I were to speak about change today, without it, we wouldn't grow. The thing is, like, if there's types of people, I guess I've learned in one of my classes, that there's a pathology that can come from change. So if we took change and put it on a scale, and people who don't like change at all versus people who enjoy change so much, those are both a pathology. Excessive change, people who don't have the capability to just stop and contain and just support, that's a pathology. There's people like that all the time, going from relationship to relationship, or from schools or jobs. There's no stability in that. And people who resist it. And I guess what I can tell from, I had an experience currently, I guess in the past couple days, or weeks or months. My parents just went through a divorce this year, so that was a big change. And so the support system there was either you accept it or you resist that change. The more you resist change, you can resist it for some time, but it's the light bulb. I guess if you took a light bulb, you know, has resistance in it, but you have to have a current to turn the light bulb on. So without resistance, there would be no light. So it's necessary. And if you don't change, then you're going to get something that doesn't change, gets moldy, right? If it, like water, I guess. Water accepts everything and moves and continuously flows. So I guess state of health is a state of constant flow, right? And change and movement. But when, this is how the ancients in Chinese medicine defined it, and in state of disease, they defined as a state of not flow, no change, state of stagnation. If nothing moves, it molds. So that's, I guess, what we're seeing now in our society. The pathologies of our society are manifesting themselves within our bodies. like cancer, heart attacks, and diabetes. It's a state of a resistance and an internal thing in what we're doing. So I think being connected and being open to it, and allowing, you can have a healthy resistance to change, but just being in tune and connected would be the best thing. And let the earth contain you and feel your feet on the ground. And I mean, as long as I just learned, it came to me maybe a couple days ago, where as long as the earth is below us and the sky is above, and those two stay in the same place, and we're in between, I think we're going to be okay.
Yes.
I just had a comment. Have you seen the new play at Portland Center Stage, The Real Americans?
No.
You should.
Okay.
Because it's almost, he did something very similar to you. It's a young man who's a writer and an actor, and after Sarah Palin's constant discussion of the real Americans, he decided to go on the road and find them. You should see it. It is kind of tangential to what you've done. In fact, after you see it, parallel to what you've done. After you see it, you probably will try to call him.
Maybe we'll become best friends.
You really should see it. It's quite terrific.
Thank you so much for the recommendation for all of us. Well, that's the thing that I think is happening here. That I had this thing happen when I was feeling like really nervous and excited about this yesterday before you arrived. I was walking over in Laurelhurst Park, and I was thinking this and thinking that, and then trying to go on, just let it go, just look at the trees, And then I'd start thinking this and thinking that, because the Home Entertainment Network apparently doesn't stop. And so I'm coming around this, I don't know if you know Laurelhurst, it's beautiful. I'm coming around this corner, and it's in the morning, it's early in the morning. And I see this thing go onto the ground. It was a squirrel. I'm like, I know, from a really high tree. And I just, and I'm watching it and I'm thinking, this being is dying. So I'm right here. I mean, it fell far. It was a long way. I thought, was it I'm thinking, was it I don't know. Well, anyway, what could have caused this? Maybe it was a heart attack. I'm thinking all this, anthropomorphic stuff on this squirrel. But I think I'm just going to stand here and be with it and watch its eyes, and it closes its eyes and then opens, and it looks like it's dying, and I go, I'm just present. I'm not really thinking a whole lot at that point. And then I remember saying to myself something like, it's okay. It's dying. You're dying. It's all right. I'm right here. And then it kind of blinked and looked around and ran off. It had hit, boom, on the concrete hard. I don't know how that squirrel survived. Immediately comes to mind Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Oregon, and the Tea Party. Now, I live inside here. Sarah says, Mom, that's so random. And I say, well, honey, I live here. This is how my head works. But the way that it happened was that we are not dead yet. This country is not dead yet. The people are not dead yet. And it may not look in a way that I necessarily agree with, but it may. And the voices of the people are legitimate. And the energy of the people in a collective is legitimate. And it's way more powerful than we have come to believe, it seems like. But something in us knows it a little bit. And so for this gentleman to have done what he did to find the real American voices, it feels that the time is right, that people are wanting to be heard. Now the question is whether or not they're willing to listen to one another, and that's why I'm doing this. It's because the listening part really seems to make an enormous difference in the way that we're able to come together toward our shared values. So, I don't know where we are in time,
Well,
but I appreciate your attention and interest.
Thank you all so much for coming, and I just want to thank Mary again for bringing us her project and for being a living embodiment of this idea that listening is an act of courage, and encouraging all of us to do the same. So thank you so much, Mary. We have some books left, and Mary is, we have some time, and Mary will be sticking around.
Annie Bloom's gave me a Sharpie.
And she'll be sticking around to sign copies, so this would be a great opportunity to get a signed copy of the book.